Vandana Shiva. What a pleasure. How are you?
Good.
Lovely to see you.
Lovely to see you and be here.
It's nice for you to come back to Canada.
It's not one of the worst places. I spent the longest time outside India here when I was doing my PhD.
Absolutely. How many people working with seeds and farmers have a background in quantum physics, do you think? Is it a lot?
No.
Right.
Well, there aren't that many people who've got a background in quantum physics to begin with. It's such a little group. And then to move into the foundations of quantum theory is an even smaller group. And they were all at Western when I came to do my PhD here.
Well, you were there with a small group of people that were kind of like, it's been described as the peak period of this kind of study with this group of people, wasn't it?
Yes, and Canada recognized that this is something worth supporting, so they attracted the best faculty. We were totally international students from around the world, and at least intellectually I haven't had a more stimulating time.
Well, when did you start to make the connections between that to the foundations, as you say?
When two steps. One was I actually thought I'd be a nuclear physicist. You know, that's the big thing in my time. Mm-hmm. And our fast breeder experimental reactor was growing critical. I had a science talent scholarship where we were sent off to these exclusive labs, and I'm in the reactor when it's going critical, and I'm so excited, and I come back home and start showing off as a young woman. I was the only woman in a sari in the entire place, and my sister, who was training to be a medical doctor, asked some basic questions on nuclear radiation, and I had no knowledge. I had no idea, and I said, they don't teach you everything. You know, they teach you the equations on fission and how to trigger a chain reaction, and you become super smart at that. But the rest you have no idea. And I realized science had become very one-eyed. Mm-hmm. How to unleash things into the environment, but not what are the impacts. So I decided to understand more the fundamentals, and I started to then study the foundations of quantum theory.
Well, and that is kind of how you approach everything from farmers to seeds to justice, is that everybody needs to look at how everything is ultimately connected in your mind, right?
Absolutely. That's what my thesis was, on non-locality in quantum theory. Now, that's the only reason I wish more people would do that kind of a study, because I think we have been, you know, the Cartesian revolution, the Baconian revolution in science, which is the foundations of contemporary thought, is based on mechanistic reductionism, fragmentation, atomization, and that's not the world. The world is a world of interconnection with both the natural world and the social world. And quantum theory recognized that 100 years ago. Biology is giving it up to do genetic engineering.
Well, do you think that just having a background in that kind of reductionism has actually put you in a position of strength when looking at some of the bigger picture issues about food? Because you can actually break the big conversations and the big dilemmas down because you just have a different place of coming from.
Well, I think the training in quantum theory taught me what is wrong with reductionism, but my training in physics taught me what mechanical thought is about, and so to be able to put the two together. And I think the second part of quantum theory is the whole recognition that there is no determinate intrinsic quantity in anything. Everything is evolving in potential, in transition, and it's uncertain where it'll be. And I think the reason I'm such an optimist in the middle of terrible collapse, disaster everywhere, is because I know there's no linear guarantee that it's going to continue that way. If we do a little more, if we think a little differently, if we are more engaged as citizens with responsibility, we could take it to another place.
Never has there been more power put on two letters, though, if. If is a key determining factor here. Do you have any reason to believe that if will actually play out in a positive way?
Yes, I do, because, you know, I moved from a career in physics, and it was a successful career, to starting a research foundation to support ecology movement. And then in '84, we had the Green Revolution disaster. We had the Bhopal disaster. Yeah. '87, I get invited to a conference on biotechnology where the companies lay out, we want to own everything, patent everything, collect royalties from life. And the same agrochemical companies were also the pharmaceutical industry was now becoming the seed industry. And they talked about how there'd be 5 controlling food and health. Well, we've got lots of farmers saving seeds. We've got organic growing at 25% in the world. And we have a situation where people realize we have not been told the full story of how much more diversity can produce. And that's the work I do,
right.
Using diversity to increase food security. And I've noticed you're the ambassador to the World Food Programme. If you've got to save this planet and provide people what they need, there's only one way to go, through biodiversity.
Do you think that people really understand the severity of it? We're talking hundreds of thousands of farmers committing suicide tied to food security, right? Since 1997, India, like, it's an overwhelming number.
It's a huge number. It's 250,000 today, according to government statistics. And the suicide started in the Cotton Belt. That's where the seed monopolies have been established. And we can see what it means when farmers lose their seed.
Explain that to people. A lot of people don't know what's happening with their seeds. They don't know about these monopolies.
Well, the first thing is 76% of all commercial seeds is now in the hands of 10 companies. Most of the genetically modified seed is in the hand of one company. And sadly, while we could be eating 8,500 species of plants, our cropping systems are being reduced to 4, which are genetically modified, where royalties can be collected. Mm-hmm. I started Navdanya, the movement for seed saving, when I realized corporations wanted to own and control life through patenting. Now, you get a patent for something you've invented. You don't invent a plant. It exists before.
Right, but this is sort of indicative of the personality of the colonizers, right? They think they invented countries, and
yes,
they just showed
exactly.
up.
I call this the second coming of Columbus. Columbus arrives in this amazing country, they're First Nations, and he says it's an empty land.
Right.
And they're no people. And they go to Australia, they're saying empty land, terra nullius, no people. And if they are people who look like human beings, they say no, they're part of the fauna and flora. It's so easy to take away the humanity of the one who's colonized. Yes. And in the first colonization, it was about land and territory.
Right.
It was also about gold. Today it's about green gold. It's about life on Earth. It's about the reproductive capacity of every seed, every plant, and the entire planet.
Talk about biopiracy, because that's part of this as well.
Yes, it is. Once you open the floodgates to patent everything, once you pretend that the new Columbuses are these giant corporations, they don't just force genetically modified crops and seeds on people because that's where they get the first patents, but they're not ashamed of taking a patent on neem, a wonderful tree that I started to promote after Bhopal with the slogan, no more Bhopals, plant a neem. That doesn't kill anybody.
Right. And
then 10 years later it's patented. We fought the case 11 years and had that patent struck down. I come from Dehradun, where the basmati is the most famous, the beautiful aromatic rice that
yes.
every Indian restaurant serves.
Yeah. I live off it half the time. Yeah.
Well, if we hadn't fought the case, you'd be eating a fake basmati from a Texas company called Rice Tech,
right.
which sells it as Texmati. Now, basmati means the queen of aroma. Yeah. Texmati means the queen of Texas. And the queen of Texas is stolen rice. We fought a case on wheat. So many people are getting gluten allergies in wheat because of the way wheat has been bred. Old Indian wheat doesn't have high gluten. That was patented.
But if, much is made about these companies, and certainly Monsanto gets lots of the thing, but if these companies are the new Columbus, ultimately Columbus sailed at the behest of kings and queens, and isn't this about the governments? Because Monsanto negotiates these deals with the government to allow them to do this. So isn't this about because companies just do what companies do?
If you were to look at the parallel, it was the Pope that issued a papal bull and said now the kings and queens can take over land not ruled by white Christian princes. So easy. Yeah. Because there were no whites outside Europe.
Right.
And there was no Christianity outside Europe. So it became so simple to take over. I think the new Vatican for all of this is the World Trade Organization. And Monsanto representatives are on record to say in writing the Intellectual Property Treaty, the Patenting of Life Treaty, they were the patient, diagnostician, and physician all in one. They defined a problem, and the problem for them was that farmers save seeds. Mm-hmm. And they offered a solution. Let us criminalize seed saving. That's why I decided we will save seed and not allow it to be criminalized. They wrote the treaty, took it to the U.S. government, then had it imposed literally on the rest of the world. It wasn't negotiated. Why did my country accept it? Because once we were members of WTO, even though our ambassador said intellectual property on life and plants is illegitimate, most governments of the world have put in submissions to the WTO to say this is an error, this is a mistake. we were forced through a WTO case. I mean, the WTO is a parliament, a court, and a government all in one. And the first case that was brought in WTO was against India, to force India to first patent seeds and life, and secondly, even more serious for the world, to allow patenting products in medicine, which means you can't make alternative generic drugs. Huge issue in India. We've done a lot to keep biopiracy out. We've done a lot to keep farmers' rights in. And that means the monopolies can't grow as fast as they'd like to. We've also put in clauses that say an authentic invention will be given a patent. So the companies are very miserable because even when they take patents on drugs, they just change the formulation 70%, 30% to 75%, 25%. And it's a new drug. It's called evergreening.
Right. Which is not authentic.
It's not authentic at all. And the most important point is the Indian laws said, if I find a different way of making something, then I can have an exclusive right to that process. But to have an exclusive right to the product, that means you work against people, their right to health. The same drug under a generic label costs 10,000 rupees, a cancer drug called Glivec. The same drug under Novartis's patent costs 175,000. The cotton seeds that have got farmers into debt, 5 rupees seed, now sold at 4,000 rupees, which is an 8,000% jump. The 5 rupee seed could be saved and grown year in and year out. The new seed has to be bought every year.
How much of this is the fact that in cultures that are what are called the so-called developed world, they just want goods and they want them cheap, and they want food and they want it cheap, and this is just what it is, and that no success of any country comes without breaking somebody else's back?
Well, the point is that cotton is costly if you take the price of the cotton seed. It's costly if you take the cost of the pesticides that have to be applied, even though BT cotton wasn't supposed to use pesticides, 13-fold increase. It's very costly if you take the human cost of the suicides. Why does all of this become cheap for a consumer culture and a consumer economy? First, because of the massive subsidies. $400 billion subsidies in agriculture is what the rich countries give to their agribusiness to then make costly products cheap. Second is monopoly. If I'm the only buyer of corn, I can buy it cheap. If I'm the only buyer of cotton, I can buy it cheap. And with subsidies, I can dump and drive down the prices. So the combination of free trade, so-called, dumping, subsidies, monopolies, that is what makes the paradox of high-cost production, which is what industrial agriculture is, produce low prices on our supermarket shelves.
When you talk about the high cost of just human life, which has obviously become incredibly overwhelming, people talk about overpopulation and that there's just no way that we can sustain. What are your thoughts on people's views of overpopulation and its impact?
Well, the first thing is, it's very easy to define any population as surplus. In America, they thought even 10% farmers was surplus. Canada, you've wiped out. You were a farming country. Finished. Less than 2%. In the US, more people in jails. There's no surplus jail population. They never apply that to...
No, they like that because they can build more prisons, right? It's a better business for them.
The most important point is precisely the two issues. One, populations start to increase when you create economic insecurity.
That's what people don't really
They don't understand. You take away the land, people have to have larger families for security. You leave land in the people's hands, they have stable populations. That was the case for India till 1815. That's the case for Kerala, which created the southern state of India, which has a negative population growth rate. And it's because they had land reform. They had a progressive government. But the second point is precisely because we have large numbers. 7 billion of our species is not a trivial number. We've got to be far more prudent in our resource use. It is crazy to use 10 units of inputs to produce 1 unit of food, which is what the industrial food system does. We can't afford. Yes, 10 units are put into the system to get 1 unit out.
We call it violence, right? Is it violent industrial farming?
It is violent. It's very violent to the soil. You've killed all the soil organism. It's violent to the biodiversity. You've destroyed 75% species. It's violent to waterways. First, because you use 70% for irrigation, and then the little bit that remains is polluted with waste of hog farms, and then Canada wants an enviro pig rather than let the poor pig be free. And finally, it's violent to the climate, because 40% of all greenhouse gases that are destabilizing our climate are coming from a bad food system that's non-sustainable and unjust, pushing farmers to suicide, and creating hunger for 1 billion people.
Mm-hmm. What's the connection to the condition of women in all this? Because you've seen all over the world the impact on, certainly in impoverished regions.
Well, I think there's a very intimate connection between a way of thinking which came out of the Industrial Revolution, and Bacon called it the masculine birth of time, a new masculine mode. It's not that you think that way, but it was defined as being masculine. And all knowledge till then, which was diversity, plurality, monocultures of the mind, and a mechanistic mind, was now defined as masculine. And then it got married to capital and making money and profits. And the marriage between knowledge and power is what has given us the mess we have on the planet, the ecological mess, but also the marginalization and domination of women. The same worldview calls nature dead, the earth has dead matter, and says women are the second sex. So the connection between women and the solution is this: women still carry the culture, not the biology, but the culture of caring and sharing and protecting. And that's the culture we need to universalize. Secondly, it's because women provide sustenance, they're the ones who get water on their heads. When the water is polluted by Coca-Cola, they're the ones who fight back and shut down that plant in Plachimada in Kerala. They're the ones who are still fighting in Bhopal because the water is contaminated. They're the ones who start to save seeds. And they're the ones who recognize that working with nature is the only way the human species has a prosperous today and a future.
You said monoculture of the mind, and I want to talk about that because all the things you're talking about that are hurting our process, it seems to be inherently human. We are very good at humans at figuring out how we can exploit something. This is what we do with everything, and that's what monoculture of the mind is to a degree, isn't it?
Well, I wouldn't call it human. I would call it that masculinist mode of thought that had the error.
Pretty human these days.
Inhuman.
Yeah.
Inhuman, because we are diverse. We have pluralistic ways of thinking.
Yes.
And the reason I love the Indian goddesses is they keep reminding us that we could have 1,000 hands. Yeah? We could be 1,000 things. You are here as a host of a show, you'll go home, you'll be something else, you have friends, you have multiple relationships.
I'll go home and I'll have multiple relationships with online video gaming, which is what I will do.
Well, the monoculture of the mind shuts down the diversity, the multifunctionality of everything, and prioritizes that which it wants to exploit. So you get monocultures of rice and wheat. You assume food is just a commodity. Food disappears as nourishment. Food disappears as something that other species share with us. But the most important point about the monoculture of the mind is it cuts off the impacts on the relationships that make nature work and make human society work.
A cow is no longer an animal.
No, the cow is just a milk machine. And where you eat meat, a beef machine.
Right.
And in Staying Alive, I've used the Indian cow, which is a symbol of the cosmos, and the industrial cow, which is just gears, mechanics, and dollar notes.
Right. You talked about, the role of women. I read that your grandfather was a feminist. Is that, or your great-grandfather?
He was my grandfather, yeah. And I think I must have been about 2 or 3 years old. My grandfather started the first school for girls in his area. And
that's a big thing.
Yeah, because girls didn't go to school at that time. And then the school did so well, he wanted it to become a college. And in those days, and even now actually, Gandhi was very much an inspiration. You remember when Gandhi wanted to stop religious violence, he'd go on a fast.
Yeah.
So my grandfather went on a fast unto death for turning a girls' school into a girls' college. And he was waiting for the president to respond. And they did respond, but one day after he had died. Today, that school is a girls' college. They just invited me a few days ago. They've kind of recognized the connection between him. My mother was a feminist, tremendous feminist, became the first to do higher studies in her community, was studying in Lahore and then became a government official in education. And then we had a partition, and she had no idea. Mm-hmm. That she's suddenly in another country, and came back and said, I'm going to be a farmer. And that's where a lot of my inspiration comes from, that for this amazing woman who'd gone through university, got a government job, farming was the ultimate place. And for me, it's been the same. And I start in the nuclear lab and saving seeds and doing organic farming, and a school called the Earth University to allow others to learn from nature community women.
You know, today is International Women's Day. What does it mean to you?
Well, it means to me that if we're going to have a future, it has to be a womanly future. And Gandhi said a prayer every day. He was a man. Make me more womanly. Being womanly is not just about women. It's about our humanity.
How do you get that across to people?
By celebrating it, by showing that an aggressive, dominated, greedy corporation is not our idea of personhood. Our idea of personhood is love and care and compassion and embrace. And I'm going to give you a hug, George.
I'll take that hug. Thank you. Having the benefit of, you've done this for a certain amount of years now, you see different generations of women and girls come through the program and see what you do. Have you noticed a difference?
I see younger women just make leaps. You know, I think the learning track is so fast because the destruction is so fast. We've got the Occupy movement. Women are there as much as the young men, unlike the armies earlier, where just men took the guns. The new change.
What do you think of the Occupy movement?
Well, I think they've done something tremendous, you know, at a time where it was assumed that people will just accept. Disposability is what I call it, you know. You don't have to have a job, you don't have to have a future. Let Wall Street walk away with billions of dollars of profits while people lose homes, jobs, lives. Occupy just came around and said, no, we will change the system. Mm-hmm. And I think the arithmetic of the 1% and 99% is an important arithmetic that the world needed to wake up to.
How do you, I mean, look, if I asked you, do you ever get down by this, you might say, no, I'm always positive. I don't know if you always are. But do you get down with this?
No, I don't get down by it.
No? Well, you must have those moments where you're frustrated by it.
No, I just think of the next thing that must be done.
Is that a mechanism by which you survive, just to constantly stay positive?
I don't do it mechanically. I do it because one has responsibilities to do it. But it is also creative, it's satisfying, it's fulfilling. Why should you be violent to yourself and give up in despair and give up in domination? And that's what Women's Day to me is about. Women said, sorry, we aren't the second sex. Not only are we equal, but in certain things we can even lead.
It's great to see you. Thank you so much for coming in. Thank you so much. So it continues.
Science had become very one-eyed. Mm-hmm. How to unleash things into the environment, but not what are the impacts. So I decided to understand more the fundamentals, and I started to then study the foundations of quantum theory.
Well, and that is kind of how you approach everything from farmers to seeds to justice, is that everybody needs to look at how everything is ultimately connected in your mind, right?
Absolutely. That's what my thesis was, on non-locality in quantum theory. Now, that's the only reason I wish more people would do that kind of a study. Because I think we have been, you know, the Cartesian revolution, the Baconian revolution in science, which is the foundations of contemporary thought, is based on mechanistic reductionism, fragmentation, atomization.
Please welcome Vandana Shiva. What a pleasure. How are you? Yes. Lovely to see you.
Lovely to see you and be here.
Nice for you to come back to Canada.
It's not one of the worst places. I spent the longest time outside India here when I was doing my PhD.
Absolutely. How many people working with seeds and farmers have had a background in quantum physics, do you think? Is it a lot?
No. Right. Well, there aren't that many people who've got a background in quantum physics to begin with. It's such a little group. And then to move into... And that's not the world. The world is a world of interconnection with both the natural world and the social world. And quantum theory recognized that 100 years ago. Biology is giving it up to do genetic engineering.
Well, do you think that just having a background in that kind of reductionism has actually put you in a position of strength when looking at some of the bigger picture issues about food? Because you can actually break the big conversations and the big dilemmas down because you just have a different place of coming from.
Well, I think the training in quantum theory taught me what is wrong with reductionism, but my training in physics taught me what mechanical thought is about, and so to be able to put the two together. And I think the second part of quantum theory is the whole recognize the foundations of quantum theory is an even smaller group, and they were all at Western when I came to do my PhD here.
Well, you were there with a small group of people that were kind of like it's been described as the peak period of this kind of study with this group of people, wasn't it?
Yes, and Canada recognized that this is something worth supporting, so they attracted the best faculty. We were totally international students from around the world, and at least intellectually I haven't had a more stimulating time.
Well, when did you start to make the connections between that to the foundations, as you say?
When two steps. One was I actually thought I'd be a nuclear physicist. That's the big thing in my time. Mm-hmm. And our fast breeder experimental reactor was growing critical. I had a science talent scholarship where we were sent off to these exclusive labs, and I'm in the reactor when it's going critical, and I'm so excited, and I come back home and start showing off as a young woman. I was the only woman in a sari in the entire place, and my sister, who was training to be a medical doctor, asked some basic questions on nuclear radiation, and I had no knowledge. I had no idea, and I said, they don't teach you everything. They teach you the equations on fission and how to trigger a chain reaction, and you become super smart at that. But the rest you have no idea. And I realized